Hello, and thank you for watching this episode of the Sports Detective Show on YouTube. If you're unfamiliar with this channel, my name is James Williams, and I've been doing this podcast show for over 3 years now. We are just now starting to put clips on YouTube. I've talked to people doing interviews all over the country, talking NBA, college basketball, college football, NFL stuff. Done over 50 plus interviews. We're now starting to put those interviews and more clips like this onto YouTube. So if you like clips like this, hit that subscribe button. If you like this video specifically, hit that like button. Without any further ado, let's get into the content here today. And boy, oh boy, we did a video last week when the Detroit Pistons had lost their 24th straight game. And a week later, they are now up to 26. And kind of our point in that video and my kind of takeaway from it was, hey, it's 24 straight games. It's really bad. But if they're going to snap it, they have all this motivation to do it. It's might be coming this week because they played the Jazz on the second night of a back-to-back, and then they were going to play the next game they played was going to be the Nets on the second night of a back-to-back for them. So it was like, hey, you're playing these teams off a little bit of rest. Um, Maybe they, underestimate you a little bit, like, oh, it's the Pistons, they suck. Maybe they don't give their full effort. Maybe they have an off night shooting threes, and maybe the Pistons would be able to snap it. The Pistons didn't, including the Utah Jazz game, which was at home. And the Jazz had like 8 guys that were out with injury or rest. And the Jazz ended up winning. And the fans now I listened to a few Detroit podcasts talking about this game. The stadium, the arena for that game was actually relatively full because a lot of the fans were like, hey, if it's going to happen, it's going to happen this game. And we want to see it happen because we don't know how many games we're going to see the Pistons win this year. So the arena was actually pretty full. And when the fans knew that they were going to lose this game, they let their frustrations known. And we'll show you a clip of this video here of what the fans were chanting Thursday night in Detroit. So if you couldn't completely hear that, the fans were yelling, "Sell the team." They also had chants that night of fire Troy Weaver, who is the Pistons GM, and they also had chants of fire Monty Williams, who is the current head coach of the Detroit Pistons, obviously. Um, Now, if you're unfamiliar with who the Pistons owner is, his name is Tom Gores. Gores, it's Gores. And he bought the team, I believe, in 2011. He became like the sole majority owner around 2016. So he's been affiliated with the team since about 2011, though. And this is a stat I heard on the Bill Simmons podcast last week when he was talking about this, where the Pistons since 2009, which was the last year that was kind of like the end of that kind of like Billups, Ben Wallace kind of run there, that 2000s kind of run that they had. First off, they haven't won a playoff game since 2008, but since 2009, they have the worst record in the entire NBA out of every single team. And Tom Gores, as we are seeing here with this current Pistons team, is making a pretty strong run as the worst NBA owner that we have. Now, we have had a few guys kind of drop out of the running here. Robert Sarver obviously sold the team last year. James Dolan has gotten the Knicks. Don't give credit to James Dolan, but the Knicks have actually started to be competitive and make the playoffs. They won a playoff series last year, obviously. So the Knicks are kind of like, a lot more better run than they were maybe, let's say, 5 years ago. And Charlotte sold their team. MJ sold their team, so he's kind of out of the running. The human slug himself, Donald Sterling, is out of the league for 9 years now. So now the person that's taken the throne is Tom Gores. And just kind of like getting back to like the Pistons and stuff of the substance on the floor, I watched these games. And I actually rewatched them this morning before I recorded this video. And the Pistons, it's not even necessarily a thing where it's like now I think the weird thing about this losing streak is that they're not trying to lose. Like, this team isn't trying to lose. This team wasn't trying to get the 1 seed this year, obviously, but they were trying to build, be competitive, and kind of like evaluate the talent that they have. They don't want to be 2-27. I think they were kind of hoping maybe we can kind of fight for that play in this year because they've been bad the last 2 years. They were bad enough to draft Killian Hayes with the 7th pick. They got a Sewer Thompson, Jaden Ivey with the 5th picks, and then you had Cade Cunningham obviously with the 1st pick. This is Cade Cunningham's 3rd year in the NBA. Tyrese Halliburton got drafted in 2020. The Pacers are going to make the playoffs this year. Both play the same position. So you kind of thought the Pistons would be trying to fight for this play-in. They bring in Monty Williams, who, say what you want about Monty Williams. Is he the best head coach in the NBA? No. Is he a good coach in the NBA? I mean, you could say yes. He did take a team to the finals. I know a lot of people have their criticisms of him, but he does have a little bit of a reputation of, like, what he did in Phoenix, where he came in, he was kind of able to kind of cultivate all this young talent, make these guys believe. They get Chris Paul and they take off and they go to the finals. And I think that now, again, the Pistons weren't trying to make the finals this year, but I think they were kind of like, hey, Monty Williams can come in. He can be a little bit of a culture setter. They made him the highest paid coach in the NBA. And I'm just kind of watching the Pistons this year, the kind of the expression on Monty Williams' face. Now, he's a guy that's, publicly kind of said things about his faith in life. He's a guy that looks depressed on the sidelines. And I think he's a guy that's like kind of knows that this team is hopeless as it's currently constructed. And as I was kind of watching these games, because I was like, okay, do something different. Do something different if you're the Pistons. Like, having a small ball lineup, maybe be kind of like what the Lakers did when they beat OKC last week, where they were like, hey, we're just going to kind of have this huge starting lineup and we're going to kind of overwhelm some teams with our size. And that's what the Lakers are going to try and start doing. Do something different. And I was just kind of watching them. I'm like, as far as like rotations go, because that's kind of like the criticism of Monty Williams is like the rotations right now. As far as rotations go, Monty Williams really doesn't have much kind of like cards that he can play. If you look at the Pistons, they typically play like 1 or 2 guards. So it's like Cade and Ivey. And then their wings are kind of like they're rotating out a Sewer Thompson. They're rotating out Kevin Knox, Bogdanovich. And then basically their big men are like kind of like, because they've had like Duran's hurt, which is a huge, huge loss for them watching them play. It's basically Isaiah Stewart and Marvin Bagley. No James Wiseman in sight. And like they're a team that doesn't have any forwards. Like, their forwards are Sir Thompson and Bogdanovich and Kevin Knox. Other than that, they don't have any forwards, and that's kind of their weak spot on their team. They can't get easy offense, and in every game that they're playing, they just seem small. And being small is okay, but when you're like the worst 3-point shooting team in the NBA, and you can't just like, hey, we'll just get hot one night and we'll break this streak. When it comes down to like, if you're kind of pointing the finger of like who is really to blame here, it has to be Troy Weaver, the GM, and how he put together this team. Now, there isn't exactly like one terrible move that he's done. There's not like, you drafted this guy over this guy. You traded away this guy, and that was this big colossal mistake because he's out doing this in this Western Conference team. Like, it's kind of like a combination of a lot of little things, but you can't fire Monty Williams because you just signed him to this huge contract. That would be like a $78 million buyout, I think, if you were to fire Monty Williams. So that's not happening. Basically, the move is going to be like, if you want to fire Troy Weaver, which is probably just going to happen anyway, maybe rip off the Band-Aid now. It is past the holidays, maybe go into the new year with a new GM, new kind of energy with how you're running the organization. Maybe that's a thing you could do. The other thing here, too, would be just like, again, if you really... this is going to sound a little crazy, but to just kind of change the temperature in the room, to kind of change the vibe of this team, your 2 biggest assets are Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey. And this losing streak cannot be good for them. It cannot be good for their development. It cannot be good for their, mental well-being and, basketball mental health too, which I think is a thing. Where like I heard like reports of like Cade Cunningham being like very emotional after like the Jazz loss, because it's like, hey man, like he played well. The game that they lost Tuesday night, he dropped 43 against the Hawks. He played well. And it's like he's playing well and it doesn't matter because the pieces around him aren't, being sufficient. Like they're being just seems like they can't really guard anybody a lot of times too. The games I've seen was Asar Thompson. I know people have been saying like, hey, we kind of like some of the stuff we see out of him. When I see him play out there, he doesn't have much of an offensive game, and he just seems raw. He just seems very, very raw. Doesn't have an outside shot. Um, and Ivy and Cade look good. I think you just have to sell. I don't know if you're selling high or selling low on either of those guys right now. But if you can sell those guys and maybe get a few wings, maybe it's like calling up the Spurs and being like, hey, can we get Sohan for Ivy? Um, Something like that. Keldon Johnson for Ivy. Getting some more kind of like a swing man to kind of like, integrate themselves in this team. That's kind of what you need. You just need to change something up here. And as far as the streak's going, I think they're going to break it. So the longest, like if they like right now they're at 26, they're tied with I think the Cavaliers and is it the 76ers? I can't remember who. Um, with this streak here, if they lose it, they are in sole possession of the single season longest losing streak in NBA history. The longest losing streak in NBA history is actually the 76ers, but they did it 28 games in two separate seasons. So it was kind of like during their tanking years in the early 2010s. They had one season where they were like on a losing streak, ended that season. They started off the next season on another losing streak. So, but I think the Pistons are going to break both of those because it just doesn't, this combination of guys doesn't work. And the only thing I could think is like to try and break this losing streak would be to with the roster that they have is just like you tell Cade Cunningham like, hey, be Luka Doncic, be Trae Young, be James Harden in Houston. No, again, I'm not saying that Cade is that quality of player, but just what I mean by saying that is have it be a Cade centric offense where every possession runs through Cade. Tell Cade, we want you to get 35 and 13 every night. We want you to be a 30-point double-double guy with assists, where we are doing a high pick and roll with you every single time, kicking out the guys on the outside, whether it be Bogdanovich, Ivy, Thompson, Knox. That's the only thing I can think of because as far as this roster is currently constructed, I watched that whole Nets game today. They just look small. They couldn't stay in front of everybody. The guards, like, because Cade and Ivy aren't necessarily stellar defenders. They can't play defense. They can't shoot threes, and they're small. And when you have the NBA right now, which is as deep it has been in a very long time, this isn't a formula for success. So, dang. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section on the Pistons and their current losing streak, what they should do. Should they trade Cade? Should they trade Ivy? If you want to be really crazy, trade them both. Because this Pistons thing is an utter mess, and the fans are absolutely fed up with what they are seeing.